Hello and welcome to Season 3, Episode 28 of Logicast, the AWS News podcast brought to you by Logicata. I'm Carl Robinson, CEO and co-founder of Logicata, and I'm joined, as always, by my ever-faithful colleague, lead cloud engineer, John Goodall. How are you doing today, John?
I'm still on antibiotics.
Oh, still on antibiotics. Well, it makes a change from hearing about your plumbing, I suppose.
I know, I bought a tap too. I have bought a tap.
Oh.
I haven't fitted it yet, but no, I'm okay. Can't complain. Bit drizzly over here, so yeah.
It is a bit drizzly. It is a bit drizzly, but probably not as drizzly as it is where our guest is joining us from today. So we're delighted to welcome Joshua Walker, fellow AWS community builder, all the way from Orlando, Florida, as our guest today. So how are you doing today, Josh?
Good. Great to be on the podcast. Appreciate you guys. It's always good to connect with other builders and just, AWS community folks in general. So
tell us a bit about what you do for a living and what you do for the community normally.
Yeah, so I'm a senior solutions architect. I work within one of the big four consulting firms in our cloud engineering department. And then I focus mainly on life sciences and healthcare, and then also utility companies. So pretty much if they're getting audited a lot, those are the clients I have. So, and then on the community builder side, I've just done stuff in social impact for a long time, way before being a community builder, which is why I was able to, apply. And this is now my second year as a community builder. So usually doing a lot of training, whether it's online or in person, just to really help people get into the field of cloud computing by way of AWS. I used to be more cloud agnostic, but I think at some point you got to kind of pick a side in some way. So I've been mainly AWS, but I've done other projects as well for with Azure and GCP and Oracle Cloud, which I'm glad I haven't done one of those projects in a long time. So so yeah, that's a little bit about myself, but been
nice.
enjoying the ride. Yeah.
Are you working with young people looking to get into IT, or are you working with people who are reskilling from other industries? Or?
Yeah, I think a little bit of both. So there's a lot of smart people that come from other industries, and they either see their industry is drying up or they're just tired of what they've been doing for a long time. So they have a lot of skills that come over right away. And then honestly, as you guys know how fast everything moves, really it's just about having a killer mentality of like always being able to learn and pick up stuff. So I think if you have that, I feel like you can get into our field if you could basically kind of bang your head against the wall, for a certain amount of time until you break through, then you're ready for IT essentially. So
nice. And are you doing technical training as well, or is it more kind of the coaching of how to get into the industries?
A little bit of both. So I have we're doing a cloud computing cohort coming up here. It's more intro because it's for the practitioner exam, which I'm always transparent. This exam is not going to get you like a job, but it's a good entry point into our field. But I'm going to be doing a lot of bonus content that'll be based on them building their portfolio. Because I think that's the biggest thing, right? Everyone can get the certification. Everyone can kind of talk about stuff high level, but what have you actually built is what people are hiring for. So I'm trying to focus more on hands-on because that's the best teacher for sure.
Yeah, and we're always looking for what people do in their spare time. If you don't have any experience in the industry, then how can you demonstrate what you've built? Well, just build something in your spare time, right? Go and get a Raspberry Pi and build something in the cloud. And whether it's a hot tub thermostat or some weird and wonderful things. Raspberry Pi
geofencing.
Yeah, Raspberry Pis floating down the canal network and things like that. So but no, it's really cool that you're involved in that because we know that there's a huge shortage of good skilled resource in the tech industry. So
100%.
Anyone who is advocating for people to come and join the industry is a fantastic effort. So commend you on that effort, Josh. But we're not here to talk about Josh's efforts in reskilling people to the tech industry, nor are we here to talk about John's taps or his ongoing illnesses. Regular listeners to the podcast will know that every week I curate a list of AWS news, which I share via my weekly AWS News Roundup newsletter. Then John and I, together with our guests, pick a subset of the articles from the newsletter that we'd like to talk to you about on the podcast. So we do, of course, have such a set of articles this week. And the first one is a new feature announcement for identity and access management. And the title is AWS Identity and Access Management Simplifies Management of OpenID Connect Identity Providers. So, John, I'll come to you first on this. Give us a few definitions, I guess, about IAM and OpenID and what's new.
Just before that, I want to give a virtual hug to anyone dealing with the CrowdStrike fallout. We couldn't do an episode without talking about it. Just virtual hug to everybody, because that's just going to suck.
Yeah, yeah.
So, yeah. Right.
It's probably helping spike the Headspace app. Like, so do what you got to do to take care of yourselves right now. Yeah.
Yeah, damn right. Right. That out the way. So,
I'm just doing some breath control, by the way.
Okay, well, can you do it on mute, maybe? Right, IAM. Everyone knows what IAM is, but let's go through it anyway. Identity and access management. That's who gets access to what and the levels of access and requirements for access and all that kind of thing. OpenID Connect is a way of interfacing with third parties through IAM without having to give them a user. So rather than creating a user and doing an access key and a secret key, which is what you used to have to do, OIDC, OpenID Connect, allows that external service through a number of security controls to assume a time-limited temporary role within your account. And then you can control it in the same way through permissions, and the role has certain permissions and it has requirements and conditions and kind of all the rest of it. That's a lot better generally because IAM users have long-lived credentials. That's the word I'm looking for. They're not time-limited. They are long-lived. They are, perpetual. And the recommendation is you need to rotate them every 90 days, which is only, 4 or 5 times a year. But that's a pain in the butt if you have lots and lots of service users and pipelines and all the rest of it that you have to worry about that for. So that's a pain, and we don't like that. OIDC just takes that problem and sacks it off completely because every time the system connects, it gets temporary credentials to assume the role. And you think, well, how is that secure? Well, there's 2 or 3 different ways you're doing the security. The first is that you're saying through the trust policy of the role, only this external repo, because it's typically for things like GitHub, GitLab, only this external account and repository and even branch is able to assume this role. So you can basically say for production, only the main branch or master branch, if you haven't caught up with the naming convention, is able to assume this role. And then for your staging and your non-production environments, only these repos, but any branch can assume this role. And that basically just restricts it down and down and down without you having to do lots of transference between them and secrets and all the rest of it. And that's really messy. Now, all of these things are secured by certificates because almost everything is done through TLS these days. Historically, what you've had to do is you've had to provide a thumbprint ahead of time, or if you're doing it in the console, you kind of put the URL in and then retrieve the thumbprint, and then they agree with each other, and then it can work. Not a huge length of time ago, GitHub specifically didn't need that anymore, and they could just trust the root CA. So they trust the certificate authority. You didn't have to do this 2-way transit. Great, we like that. And it made things like doing OIDC through infrastructure as code through IAC. I'm going to just loads of acronyms in this. It made setting this up through infracode a lot easier because you didn't have to have the thumbprint ahead of time, and there was no easy way of getting that. So you had to set it up manually and then grab the thumbprint and then get rid of it again. And then the thumbprint is actually a secret value, so you had to put that in secrets. And it was all just kind of a bit of an Ouroboros of suck, if we're really honest. Going to a CA trust model, that made things a whole lot easier. And they just rolled that out to a bunch more. So it was just GitHub, I think, to start with. It doesn't say who's included in this, but I would think it's GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, the big ones.
The big ones, yeah.
And if you've got self-hosted things, or if you've got a smaller provider that you're working with, then you can still do the old-fashioned thing with the thumbprint trust if you have to. But this just makes life a hell of a lot easier just to get going with the right way to do things. Because OIDC is a bit complicated if you're not familiar with it. So this makes life a whole lot easier to get going with doing it properly.
Agreed.
Thoughts on this, Josh?
Yeah, so just to answer it a little bit different. So I agree it's a big deal for sure. For me, they're just making it simpler to manage OpenID, OIC, and then really just automating certificate management. I think this means, the IT admin essentially will have less to worry about because, with how wide the landscape is getting, it makes it really hard to do things at scale, especially if you have multiple clients. So I like any facet of AWS where it's like you're giving up control in lieu of security. So I think, and then handling all the nitty gritty stuff you talked about, it wasn't enjoyable. It was just a time suck. So I think this is a win-win for everyone involved because it's going to mean less breaches, but then we could focus on like the stuff we actually care about building but securely. So that's really my take on this. I think it's a huge improvement. Yeah.
Nice. We like. All is good in the world.
Yeah.
Well. I mean,
Well, no,
CrowdStrike is still
not in
broken.
CrowdStrike and Microsoft.
World's still
but,
burning, but yeah, but we like that.
In this world, yeah. So on that note, let's move along to our second article for this week. And this one is all about Redshift. So a little bit of a cheeky one because it's only announcing a feature in a specific region, but worth talking about nonetheless. This one is all about Amazon Redshift Serverless introducing a lower base capacity in the Europe London region. Josh, I'll come to you first on this one. Tell us a little bit about this. I mean, obviously, London's a bit far away from, the big old US of A where you're based. But
I mean, it's still a huge deal because, I work with a lot of global clients. So they want to keep their data warehousing costs down, but still need really the flexibility to scale up quickly. So imagine being able to run your analytics without worrying about over provisioning or overspending because, everyone wants like the big one until the bill comes. It's like having a data warehouse that grows with you essentially now with this improvement. So I think it'll just make it more dynamic for the folks in that region. So I think it's a big deal. And I think, when we're talking about redundancy as far as region, folks will have just another option as far as like where they want to back up and all that. So, so that I think it's, even though it's less affecting me as like someone that's using like, US East, whatever, I still see the implications on the global scale of how this will help for sure.
Do you know, or do either of you know, where else this lower Redshift capacity is available? Is this a first, or is it just new to London?
That's a good question.
Don't know. Didn't look.
Yeah.
I was too annoyed about it not being really a serverless service. Still.
It is kind of a weird type, like how they pronounced it was like, okay, that serverless, but yeah,
serverless, but
I
not
get the
really
noise.
because it has a minimum capacity. This is it's in the preamble. I'll always find something to complain about. This is it. So lower base capacity, great. You talk about the world being on fire. A great way of burning money is spinning up things like Redshift Serverless because it just costs a load of money to sit there and do nothing. Because base capacity, you must pay this much money for the service to exist. Okay, I'll just run servers then because that's cheaper.
Right.
Here's the rub with pay-as-you-go services in general, to be really honest, but it's a lot more keenly felt in these serverless services that aren't really serverless services. God, try saying that with no teeth. If you go and look at the data, and I've done this not for Redshift, but I've done this for Aurora. If you look at the capacity units and how much sort of compute you get, the resources that you get, and then you try and map that to an equivalent sort of instance, it's like the price, if you go, capacity is the same. The price for instance-based is about down here by comparison. It's a quarter the price by and large. So what are you paying for? You're paying for management. You're paying for a management fee. Okay, fine. I can see this being useful for large enterprises because overnight it's going to scale down to really low and no one's really going to be using it, but they do need to scale up very rapidly without people having to worry about it. But they do want it online still because reasons.
Yeah.
Generally, though, my attitude is if you don't need it online, turn it the hell off. You can turn things off. Just pause them. Write a cheeky Lambda. AWS have done a bunch of them for things like Aurora, RDS, EC2. So it's a fairly well-designed pattern. Write a little Lambda that just turns it off at night, turns it back on in the morning. It's a whole heap cheaper than this. Yes, okay, you've spent some engineering time, but if it's cost you longer than an hour to write it, then you're not an engineering team, to be really honest. These are not terribly complicated things to do. I like the fact that it's a little bit cheaper to run. I like a reduction in base capacity. I'd be very happy if the base capacity was 0. Until then, I'm going to be annoyed about this.
Yes. No, I agree. And I work selfishly, I work in the enterprise space mostly. So if I was talking to like some of my like startup counterparts, then this is like no one is going to use this, but for like enterprise, for peace of mind of like, hey, it needs to always be on. I get the use case. So, but I also get your annoyance for sure. Yeah.
And did you check out what an RPU is? I've just been looking at that.
Redshift Performance Unit, I should think.
Yeah, it's processing unit. Each one is 16 gig of RAM. So even 8 gig base capacity is quite high, isn't it? It's 8 times 16 gig of RAM. Yeah.
I mean, Redshift is a fairly meaty product. It's a data warehouse at the end of the day.
Cool. Okay, well, on that note, let's move along to our third article for this week. And this one is all about AWS Web Application Firewall. It's a blog post on the Networking Content Delivery blog entitled Protect Against Bots with AWS WAF Challenge and CAPTCHA Actions. So, John, I know we're doing a lot of WAF work with customers. Is this, and in fact, I think we've working
done
with
this
these
before,
specific actions in the last couple of months, because I remember it coming up in internal conversations. So tell us a little bit about this.
Yeah, so this isn't new. This is just here's how you can do this. And there's some interesting things going on in here. We've worked with these exact services before with a number of our clients, a few. And they're really good for things like you're under some sort of attack, you're being DDoSed, you've got some script kiddie doing something really naughty, but you can't really pin down where they are. Pop a CAPTCHA on, problem goes away. You have a slightly worse experience for your users because everybody hates answering CAPTCHAs. Everybody hates it. And the default ones don't have your branding on. They've got AWS branding. So all of a sudden it's like, what am I? But it does solve the problem. Problem stops dead because bots can't solve it. Script kiddies get bored because, again, bot, and they're just teenagers living in their parents' basement, I think. And it kind of solves the problem dead. Great. Like this. Like that a lot. How do you do it? Well, there's a whole bunch of things you can do in here, and it interacts with clients, and you can do things with the SDK and sort of all the rest of it. But a lot of it is plug and play. So if you have the WAF already configured, or even if you don't, configure the WAF, turn a CAPTCHA rule on. You can do it on the whole site if you want. Don't recommend that because, again, crappy UX. But if you do it on, say, a basket or a checkout, that's quite common. People are used to that. Or a login, again, people are used to that. And those are areas of sites that are most commonly targeted, things like logins and baskets and all the rest of it, because logins, credential stuffing. Again, you put a CAPTCHA on, you can't stuff because it's going to sit there and block you for ages. Great, lovely. We've got this nice kind of diagram in, is that in UML? I haven't seen that since university. I don't often see these sorts of diagrams anymore. It's usually just big pictures. So that's nice. That's new. It's just kind of walking through the whole thing and showing how it works and how you can do it. There's a couple of other bits as well, because you can integrate with it through the SDK, through either JavaScript or mobile, and then you can do things like custom pages and all that kind of thing. But yeah, this is good. I like this. If you have a reason for needing this, then you have a reason for needing this. This isn't just that's a great thing, I'll go and add that to my blog. Your blog probably doesn't need it, if we're honest. And there are better ways of dealing with denial of wallet attacks for serverless resources. Things like rate limits are better than this because they're a lot less intrusive. But generally, this is good. And really, I quite like the CAPTCHAs that AWS do because it's a bit different. The old ones of which fill this out. What does this image look like? Okay, boring. How many of these have bicycles in them? It's a little bit more interesting. Yeah. What's the end of the path of this car in the city? Oh, it's over there. That's much more fun. Because if you're going to have to do this sucky process anyway, at least make it interesting.
What's wrong with I'm not a robot?
Well,
how robots they work. Figured out to...
You know how they work. They're actually really interesting. And most CAPTCHAs work like this, to be really honest. You're not solving a challenge. It is detecting randomness in your web history and using that to work out whether you're a human or not, because you've gone to weird places or your mouse has moved in weird ways and kind of all the rest of it. And they don't tell you that's how it works. And you think you're solving a challenge or doing some OCR that a computer couldn't do. It's a way of getting you to sit there on a page for long enough for them to actually kind of read a bit of data about you.
Yes, yeah.
But by sitting there and answering a challenge, people feel a lot happier about just, please wait whilst we work out that you're human, which is how like Cloudflare and stuff do it. Just we're going to sit here for 5 seconds and check. But if you put a challenge, a thing to do in front of a person, they're still more engaged and the dropout rates are lower.
Anything to add on this one, Josh?
Yeah, I think this is great because of like, instead of blocking all traffic and risking like legitimate users getting caught in the crossfire, you're now basically, challenging suspicious activity a little bit smarter. Me being an enterprise, pretty much, I always assume that all my clients are under attack all the time just because of, they're very visible. So I think this is I thought this was a really brilliant use case of to John's point, that's something that's somewhat boring, but has a huge impact on making sure that, you know, your client is secure. So and I had to do like a WAF project not that long ago for, you know, a sensitive data client. And this is one thing that was, you know, super important, just because, you know, they're always scraping to see if they can find some vulnerability for that, you know, someone that's super visible, buying other companies, things like that. They're always scraping to find what they can get. So, yeah. So I think it's a big win in short. Yeah.
What's your favorite type of CAPTCHA?
I do like the bicycle example, because I think it's like, and like how they do it, it's weird where you have to think about it, because you would think you could just easily do pattern recognition, but then they'll put like, you're like, is that a bike or is that a tricycle? Like, it makes you like, you know, it's really strange. It's really
I love the ones like that as well, where it's, you know, pick all of the squares that got one image, it's broken a bunch of squares. Pick all of the squares that have got a traffic light in, and it's in by like about that much. It's like, is that in? That's like 2 pixels in. Do I click that or not?
Yeah, sometimes they get a bit stuck though, don't they? I don't know if it's just me that's really bad at solving puzzles, or if there's a problem with the tech. But it's like, I'm on my 5th puzzle now. Just surely you know I'm human by now. So please let me in.
No, you're too robotic.
Yeah, maybe that's what it is. Yeah. Anyway, on that note, let's move along to our next article for this week, and this one is another blog post from the Media and Entertainment blog, all about media content localization with AWS AI services and Amazon Bedrock. So we've got 3 articles in this week before mentioning AI, but of course we had to mention AI because everything's all about AI at the moment. By the way, have you seen that terrible movie? Sorry, I shouldn't spoil it for you. Have you seen that movie on Netflix with Jennifer Lopez and various AI terrorists and things like that? It's
just from description, that's a hard pass.
Yes,
for me.
it's called Atlas. It's called Atlas.
Yes. I
Jennifer
liked
Lopez,
it.
yes.
I liked it.
Yeah, I watched it. So yeah, it was a bit of light entertainment, let's put it that way. But anyway,
yeah, it was a solid C- film. It was like, it was okay. It's a couple of hours. I wouldn't have been happy paying 20 quid for a cinema ticket for it, though.
No, definitely not. Definitely not. Anyway, that's the sexy side of AI. This is slightly less sexy, but still fun nonetheless. So this is all about media content localization with AWS AI services and Amazon Bedrock. How to translate your what was it they translated? Was it a blog post or
something like
that? Some content from English into Korean. So obviously, I'm expecting you, John, to implement this for Logicast, so that
that's exactly why I picked this.
Go after the Korean audience. But yeah, it seems like a logical extension to what we're already doing with AI for the podcast. But yeah, what were your thoughts on this one?
That's exactly why I picked this, because I want to build this. I want to go and do this. But first, I need to update the existing workflow to use a more modern Claude version rather than Claude 2. Priorities, because none of this pays the bills. So I need to do things for customers that pays money before I can then spend some time doing this kind of thing, which is fun. But no, I like this generally at a high level. I've not been through it in any. Don't hit my arm. I've not been through this in a great level of detail. I'm not quite sure what the SageMaker notebook is actually doing, if I'm really honest. But generally, in theory, this is a cool idea, because localization is hard. As a rule, localization is hard. And we're here speaking English. We're all English native speakers. Okay, colloquialisms are not going to come across particularly, but traditional translation, if you look at Google Translate, has always been terrible. Yes, because it misses loads of context clues and doesn't work very well with tonal languages. Because if you look at various kind of, I think Cantonese, Mandarin, they're fairly tonal in that you can say, you use exactly the same words and you say it slightly differently and it means completely different things, which is awful for translating because, again, it miss tone really easily. So again, good use of AI, nice little workflow, all serverless, which again, I like. Well, SageMaker isn't serverless technically. You've got to spin up an environment, but I'm really not sure what the SageMaker notebook is actually there for. I think it's just there to kind of help you walk through the process a little bit, but you could quite easily chuck this into a step functions workflow, from what I can tell, because transcribe, easy to do, get the text out, throw it into translate, easy to do, stick it out in S3. Great. Like that a lot. I'd like to see, however, an extension of this, and I might try and build this, where it then retranslates it, re-speaks the translated version in something like Poly, because that'd be really cool. Because
That'd
you've
be
then,
useful.
it's not live translation, but you've got a foreign language version, you can do it in French or Spanish or whatever, because I don't think Korean's supported by Poly, but in another language, where you've then got the audio version. Which, okay, again, it won't be perfect. And odds are people using this are not going to have the people on payroll to go and validate it. So it might be saying something completely wrong, but it'd be good. It'd be fun, be interesting.
Yeah, I think this is a really great use case. I think one of my first mentors in tech, forever ago, she's big in like UX, and like accessibility is a big thing. So I think this will help make it so we can make content for a broader audience. I know like on YouTube, a lot of people watch me in like the India region because there's a lot of dense tech talent there. So I could see like how this could be applied for us that teach others. Like I think this would be a big deal. And then you basically have like a multilingual production team working around the clock essentially for you, with depending on how you use it. So I think this will have a huge benefit just from a media standpoint for sure.
Can you see yourself building it?
The Poly extension, or
Yeah,
just
the
like
whole,
or
yeah,
just
localizing some of your YouTube content.
Yeah, I definitely could, because I think it's something I've like, it would have took a lot of time even like a year ago to like, transpose those to another language. But now this is like more at your fingertips, where even if it's not 100% perfect, they probably would get enough context to still, consume my content. So definitely something I want to pilot for sure.
Nice. So, moving on to our last article for this week, and I'm conscious of time. This article was an article on CRN for the 10 biggest news stories of 2024 so far. Sorry, the 10 biggest AWS news stories of 2024 so far. So I don't think we're going to have time to go through all 10, but maybe let's pick one each. John, what was your favorite out of the top 10 news stories of AWS this year so far?
Now you're relying on the fact that I've read it before coming into the recording, which is rare.
Well, you could just pick the first one if you haven't. That's it's save the scrolling, and hope that wasn't also Josh's favorite. So
Yeah, no, it's going to be the CEO switch, which is the top one, which you have to go all the way through to the top article. But it's going to be the CEO switch, because that came to those of us not necessarily that close to AWS, but kind of in the community, a little bit out of the blue, because
Yeah.
didn't see that one coming. Silipsky had only been in for what, 3 and a smidge years, something like that. Not very long at all for a CEO tenure. Okay, I'm an engineer, and I don't think I've stayed anywhere longer than 3 years, but for a CEO tenure, that's not a long time, and it kind of came a little bit out of the blue. Granted, when Adam Silipsky was kind of brought in, it was a bit like, who's this?
Yeah,
Because it
agreed.
was a guy that had been in the business and well known, was this sort of CEO, and then he moved over to take Jeff's job in Amazon proper, and it's like, okay, that makes sense. It's internal promotion, fine. Adam Silipsky from over there. Okay, fine. Who's this? And now it's come back to, an AWS veteran who's been there for 15 years or something like that, possibly even longer. So that makes sense. It feels like a return to form. Hopefully, we'll start to see a bit less of a focus on AI, because, again, in various bits of the community press, we didn't discuss the article, but an AWS hero, Luke Van Donkersgerd, apologies if I've got that wrong, right? Has kind of said, put out an article recently, just let me be a cloud engineer and stop talking about AI for a bit, please, because it's just kind of everywhere. And
hmm
Matt Garman is allegedly not that hot on AI. So cool. We might actually see a return to form and get back to what AWS are really good at, which is infrastructure, because that's what they're good at.
Hmm. Yeah, the one that stuck out to me was more on the sustainability, and not even from like a political standpoint, more from a nerd standpoint of like seeing this hard problem to solve, where consumption is going through the roof, but you're trying to push down emissions. So I thought that was, that's going to be a hard problem to solve, but I think we're creating better like servers and machines to kind of do that. But the rapid rate of adoption for like, AI, for example, like these are machines that take a lot of power to do what they need to do. So I'll be watching that one closely just to see what the trends look like of because they set out a really ambitious goal on pushing down emissions, but where the adoption is only going to go up for cloud as it has for the last decade or so. So yeah, that's the one that caught my eye of like, well, I'm glad that's not my role. That one would suck. But yeah.
Yeah, for me, I think it was a data center expansion. So we've had a lot of these in the newsletter. I'm not sure if we've spoken too much about it on the podcast, but
some of them.
Every other week, it's billions of dollars being invested here, billions of dollars being invested there. I think there's some of them are listed in this article here. So $15 billion in Japan over the next 3 years, 11 billion in Indiana, 10 billion in Mississippi, 5 billion in Mexico. So, billions and billions, tens of, if not hundreds of billions of dollars being invested into global data center expansion, which of course will power some AI services, but will also power traditional services as well. And to John's point about how the new CEO change is potentially going to shift the strategy. I've seen a lot of criticism of AWS's AI strategy recently, but a lot of people basically saying, focus on your core competence. You're nowhere near as good at this as Microsoft and Google. Things like, one of the articles in here that we haven't touched on is the launch of the Q assistant. But many people saying that when you put that alongside Copilot, it's kind of, it looks good when you see the AWS demos, but most people think that Copilot is so far ahead in many ways. So yeah, it's going to be interesting. It's great to see that the investment is still there in the data centers, because at the end of the day, that's where Amazon AWS started. That is what they're good at, and it will be interesting to see how someone else at the helm might steer. Which direction they're going to go.
Like boring services. Like I spoke at the DC summit. And everyone wants to go to all the AI talks, and I talked about like an obscure, but great service like AWS Glue Data Brew. And it was just like, hey guys, we can't even use AI ML if the data is crap. So so I do hope that we invest more into like services that we got to mine it and turn it into gas before we can start doing some of the cool and fancy stuff. So.
Yeah, we're definitely just riding a hype cycle on AI. It's going to be interesting to see how long that cycle lasts, and what's left at the end of that cycle when the dust really does settle. But as I say, for me, the billions of dollars being invested in data centers is encouraging. Also, billions of dollars of credits, or millions of dollars of credits being offered to AI startups, but. It's nice to see that more is being invested in data centers than that.
Just call yourself AI, buy a .ai domain, and then go build something that delivers value elsewhere.
Yeah. We need to register logicata.ai. You've just reminded me, just in case we might ever need it. So. But on that note, that is all we have time for this week, for season 3, episode 28 of Logicast. I had to flick to my other screen to remind myself which episode we're recording there. But thank you, John, as always, for your insights. And thank you, Josh, for joining us today as our guest. It's been great to meet you and great to hear your insights as well. So if listeners, if you're still listening, if you enjoyed it, tell your friends. You can download us wherever you get your podcasts. If you want to see what we look like in Josh's splendid floral print shirt that he's wearing on the podcast today, check us out on YouTube. John and I are not clashing today, even though it might look like it from our shoulders. But we are wearing different swag t-shirts on this episode. But that is all that we have time for this week. So thank you very much for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of Logicast for you. See you next time. Cheers.